Today we're going to build this floating console out of walnut, zebrawood, and maple, Uncomb's design. Now I know a bunch of shots of me milling up rough lumber doesn't make for an exciting video, so we'll kind of breeze right through that. If you guys want an in-depth video on how to properly mill lumber, let me know down below in the comments and I might be able to make that happen and show how I use the joiner, planer, and table saw to mill up all my stock. With everything milled, I use the biscuit joiner to cut some alignment slots, and I use biscuits to keep my panels aligned. I made two panels for this project. One is a longer panel that covers the top and the sides so I can have a continuous flowing grain pattern around the carcass of this piece. And the other one is a shorter bottom panel because you won't see that in the final product, so it's okay if the grain doesn't wrap around. I went ahead and marked out where I need to make my cuts, and the way I do these wraparound boxes is I cut on my line first, and then after that you'll see me tilt my blade to 45 degrees and I slowly sneak up on my cut. And when you sneak up on your cut, you can leave as much stock as possible so the grain wraps around and you don't remove too much material so it's a mismatch. Do not imitate what I'm doing here. This is actually kind of a dangerous cut. You'll see I'm using my right arm to put a lot of pressure on the board and my left hand to push this towards the fence. In general, you don't want to push stock through the table saw that is wider than it is deep. That's unstable. However, for this application, it was a cut that I actually felt comfortable with, and because of how I placed my arm and my hand and I kept everything away from the blade, I went ahead and made the cut. But please don't replicate that unless you feel absolutely comfortable with it. Finally, I cut a small bevel detail on the sides of my panels. Next, I cut in a stopped dado for my center divider between the two drawers. I marked two lines here, and those tell me where I need to stop my bit. I can't go past the far line, and I want to get my bit past the line closest to me. This panel was 1 inch wide, so I used a 3/4 bit and I took 2 passes here. Because I took 2 passes, my cut wouldn't be exact, so I planed my board to the exact fit, and then I cut these notches, and you'll see how these fit in the stop dado in a minute. The stop dado adds a really strong joint, but you don't see it in the final product. I also cut out a notch in the back here that will accept my French cleat that I'm using to hang this on the wall. I took a scrap piece of oak to actually cut my French cleat, and we will install that later. Finally, in my top piece, I cut a small dado groove in the back, or I guess you could call it a rabbet, and that's what will actually accept that French cleat that I just cut. Now it's time to assemble the box. I used the biscuit joiner to cut some biscuit holes. These don't really add a ton of strength. They're really for alignment. This is a light use piece of furniture, so it didn't need any floating tenons or anything like that in this joint. I felt comfortable with the miter joints. The biscuits really help with alignment here and kind of helps keep everything in place. They're really great, and I've loved having the biscuit joiner in my shop. You can see that center panel there just slides right into that groove, and those notches in the front make it look like it is completely flush with the top and bottom panel. I used some packing tape to kind of hold everything in place. The biscuits themselves aren't that wide, so your box can fall apart if you bump it, and the packing tape just kind of temporarily holds it. With everything in clamps, I started cutting up my maple drawer boxes. Once I cut everything to the height that I needed, I put a dado in the back that will accept my bottom panel. I got everything cut to their rough sizes, and here I used my dado blade to put a rabbet in the sides for my joinery. When I do my rabbets, I temporarily attach everything with screws, and the screws aren't really providing the structure. The rabbet joint in the glue does that, but the screw helps keep everything square and almost acts like a clamp. And you'll see I cut this recess, and what that does is allows me to plug it with a dowel, and typically I put an accent dowel in there, so I'll use a walnut dowel in that hole. Here I'm cutting the walnut dowels with what appears to be a very dull plug cutting bit. It shouldn't burn like that, and once I cut them to half depth, I run everything through my bandsaw, and there are all my plugs. You can see the screws that I was talking about here, and I simply cover up those recessed holes with glue, and I put the walnut plug in. Once that dries, I can cut it flush and sand it, and it looks like just a very nice accent piece or maybe a through dowel. But really that rabbet joint is doing all the work with the glue. I burnished my mitered corners and then used a sanding block to gently round everything over. Now all that was left is some sanding on the boxes. And if you like my videos, hit subscribe. That's the best way you can help me continue to make free content on YouTube. I use Blum undermount slides for this, and the first thing you have to do when using the Blum slides is cut this notch in the back. Some people use a router. I set up my dado blade and just run it right over there, and it's great. I have this little jig that I use to pre-drill my screw holes, and then I can put the Blum latching piece up on the front side of the drawer box. If you haven't used the Blum slides before, they are a great product. A little intimidating to install the first time, but once you do it a few times, it's really my go-to drawer slide. I use this same jig to drill a hole on the back, and it's just this little locating hole that helps the drawer box align with the slide on the back side. Next, I was able to install the slides themselves into the box just with some screws, and they mount at 90 degrees, and that was great. They just mounted right in the bottom of the box. With everything pretty much assembled, I took my French cleat piece and I glued that up into the dado groove, or I guess you could call it a rabbet, that I cut earlier. The only thing left was to get my drawer fronts taken care of, so I used one piece of Zebrawood here, and I cut it right down the middle, and that actually gave me the proper reveal that I was looking for. I love the continuous grain pattern on really any drawer fronts, but especially figured woods like this Zebrawood. I did just a really simple drawer pull. It is a half circle that is cut with a Forstner bit, and it just gives you enough room to get a finger into to pull the drawer out. To get my spacing, I use playing cards, and you just mess around with the number of cards in each slot until you find the right fit. I temporarily super glue the drawer fronts to the drawer boxes, gently pull them out, and add clamps. From here, I can drive my screws in, and I use the same technique that I use on the dowels on the drawer boxes. I recess the screw head, and then here I took a maple plug and cover that screw head. If you match the direction of the grain, cut it flush, and sand it, it practically disappears. For the walnut, I wanted a little bit of a darker touch, so I used a tinted black walnut Danish oil here. After doing a few coats of that and letting it sit, I came back with my final finish. I used General Finishes Armor Seal for my final finish on all the pieces, here using it on the drawer boxes and the drawer fronts. And then once my Danish oil had dried, I used that on the carcass of the piece as well. This floating console is one of my favorite pieces of furniture that I've ever built. I love the look of it, I love the aesthetic of it. It's different, and the bevel detail on the front really makes it seem a lot thinner than it is, and it just adds a really light touch. I'm just in love with this piece. It's been hanging in my office for about 6 months now. I've just finally gotten around to making the video, and I absolutely love it. It's different, and you won't find another piece like it out there. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time on Combs Design.